become 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello and welcome back to David Mackey's Shiny Set Out, show number 661, 160 and 600. That's right, don't forget to donate. This is Listener Funded Radio, so any kind of donation is good, including cryptocurrency if you can. If you can't donate, just tell people about the station and tell people about our shows really, because we have both Shiny Set Out and Shameless Cross Promotion, Plato's Cave. So if you can, please do donate. If you can't, tell people. Now, yes, we've talked about this for a long time now, Dave and I, human medical experiments. Wanted to talk about it, wanted to look at it. It took us only, 13 years to put a show together. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't think I'd find a lot. Half the show notes are on the United States of America. Half. Fully half. I would have thought that Africa would feature prominently, and we actually are concluding the show cycle with an African case study. If you haven't seen the movie The Constant Gardener or read the book, for that matter, I urge you, please do. It's an excellent movie. The book is very good, but the movie, movies always are more visceral. They bring it home in a more immediate fashion, and it's got some really great actors and actresses in it. The Constant Gardener, if you haven't heard of it, I highly recommend it. It's not a feel-good movie, and you're going to feel good after. But it's like I guess it's like a John Carpenter movie, yeah, where there's no happy ending. It just gives you a reality. But it's got Ray Fiennes, okay, it's got Rachel Weisz, Danny Houston is in it. It's a whole bunch of Pete Postlethwaite. You probably know him. I love his name, Pete Postlethwaite. I think it's such a cool name, Pete Postlethwaite. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into show number 661, Human Medical Experiments. Of course, we're going to talk about Hippocrates, naturally. But before that, let me just set the scene for you. We all go to the doctor when we feel unwell or need medical advice, either for ourselves or our loved ones, right? The unspoken and assumed context is that this is a good idea. This is a good decision. We should go to the doctor. We trust our medical professionals and expect them to act in our best interest. That's reasonable, right? And it is one of the pillars of our society and an unstated social contract. For the most part, I think we are correct in making those assumptions. But though, if the foundation of our trust were compromised, what if the medical and scientific establishment did not have our best interest at heart? This was clearly a worry that echoed through the millennia. Ancient peoples were just as worried about their health and health practitioners as we are. The Greek physician Hippocrates, who lived from 460 to 370 BC, is the one to whom the Hippocratic Oath is traditionally attributed. We can be fairly certain, in my opinion, there's no concrete evidence, that similar considerations were given to medical establishment, but other and perhaps earlier cultures as well, right? So they probably also had those considerations, but we don't know. After all, human nature is what it is, but we don't know. The Hippocratic Oath is an oath of ethics historically taken by physicians. It is one of the most widely known of Greek medical texts. In its original form, it requires a new physician to swear by a number of healing gods to uphold specific ethical standards. The oath is the earliest expression of medical ethics in the Western world, establishing several principles of medical ethics which remain of paramount significance today. These include the principles of medical confidentiality and non-malfeasance. As the foundational articulation of certain principles that continue to guide and inform medical practice, the ancient text is of more than historic and symbolic value. It is enshrined in the legal statutes of various jurisdictions, such that violations of the oath may carry criminal or other liability beyond the oath's symbolic nature. The original oath was written in Ionic Greek between the 5th and 3rd centuries BC, although, as we said, it's traditionally attributed to the Greek doctor Hippocrates, and it is usually included in the Hippocratic corpus, some modern scholars still regard it as having been written by Hippocrates himself entirely. Dave.
The earliest surviving copy, the oldest partial fragments of the oath date to circa AD 275. The oldest extant version dates to roughly the 10th to 11th century, held in the Vatican Library. A commonly cited version dated to 1595 appears in Koine, Greek, with a Latin translation. In this translation, the author translates, can't read it, to the Latin fotum. Below is the Hippocratic Oath in Greek from the 1923 Loeb edition, followed by the English translation. And this is only one of the... This is... I see. So we've translated to English, is that correct?
Correct.
And make you silent. So...
correct.
It's because I'm not going to be able to read the Greek one, to be honest with you. No. But I swear by Apollo, healer, by... was it? Asclepius, by Hygeia, by Panacea, and by all the gods and goddesses, making them my witness, that I will carry out, according to my ability and judgment, this oath and this indenture, to hold my teacher in this art equal to my own parents, to make him partner in my livelihood when he is in need of money, to share mine with him, to consider his family as my own brothers, and to teach them this art, if they want to learn it, without fee or indenture, to impart precept, oral instruction, and all other instruction to my own sons, the sons of my teacher, and to indentured pupils who have taken the healer's oath, but to nobody else. I will use those dietary regimens which will benefit my patients according to my greatest ability and judgment, and I will do no harm or injustice to them. Neither will I administer a poison to anybody when asked to do so, nor will I suggest such a course. Similarly, I will not give to a woman a pessary to cause abortion, but I will keep pure and holy both my life and my art. I will not use the knife, not even verily on sufferers from stone, but I will give place to such as are craftsmen therein. Into whatsoever houses I will enter to help the sick, and I will abstain from all intentional wrongdoing and harm, especially from abusing the bodies of man or woman, bond or free, because people could be bonded. And whatsoever I shall see or hear in the course of my profession, as well as outside my profession, in my intercourse with men, that means discourse, if it be what should not be published abroad, I will never divulge, holding such things to be holy secrets. Now, if I carry out this oath and break it not, may I gain for ever reputation among all men for my life and for my art. But if I break it and forswear myself, may the opposite befall me.
Nice. Nice. Now, this is an important oath, and we'll go into some others as well. And you might ask yourself, why do we bother putting this here into the show cycle? Because this is the standard that the doctors or the medical profession has given to itself. This is what they hold themselves to account for, right? And as we see, or as we will see, I should say, in the coming weeks. The breaches are most egregious. The modern versions and relevance of this oath. Now, the actual oath that Dave just shared with you has been eclipsed as a document of professional ethics by more extensive and regularly updated ethical codes issued by national medical associations, such as the American Medical Association's Code of Medical Ethics, which was first adopted in 1847, and the British General Medical Council's Good Medical Practice. These documents provide a comprehensive overview of the obligations and professional behavior of a doctor to their patients and wider society. Doctors who violate these codes may be subjected to disciplinary proceedings, including the loss of their license to practice medicine. Nonetheless, the length of these documents has made their distillations into shorter oaths an attractive proposition. In light of this fact, several updates to the oath have been offered in modern times, some facetious. The oath has been modified numerous times. Dave.
Oath of modern Hippocrates. About the oath. The Hippocratic Oath is traditionally administered to the young physician upon entering the profession. Although usually attributed to Hippocrates, it is probably an ancient Roman oath. Hippocrates, the Greek physician called the father of medicine, lived from about 460 BC to 377 BC. He placed medicine on a scientific foundation, freeing it from superstition. Philosophy and religious rites gave sound and shrewd descriptions of many diseases and raised the ethical standards of medicine or medical practice. His physiology, pathology, and therapeutics were based largely on the doctrines of his predecessors. People can see the source, and I'll mention the oath. By all that I hold highest, I promise my patients competence, integrity, candor, personal commitment to their best interest, compassion, and absolute discretion, and confidentiality within the law. I shall do by my patients as I would be done by hang on, I'll read that again. I shall do by my patients as I would be done by. Shall obtain consultation whenever they desire, shall include them in the extent they wish in all important decisions, and shall minimize suffering whenever a cure cannot be obtained, understanding that a dignified death is an important goal in everyone's life. I shall try to establish a friendly relationship with my patients and shall accept each one in a non-judgmental manner, appreciating the validity and worth of different value systems and according to each person a full measure of human dignity. I shall charge only for my professional services and shall not profit financially in any other way as a result of the advice and care I render to my patients, I shall provide advice and encouragement for my patients in their efforts to sustain their own health. I shall work with my profession to improve the quality of medical care and to improve the public health, but I shall not let any lesser public or professional consideration interfere with my primary commitment to provide the best and most appropriate care available to each of my patients. To the extent that I live by these precepts, I shall be a worthy physician.
In the 1960s, the Hippocratic Oath was changed to require utmost respect for human life from its beginning, making it a more secular obligation not to be taken in the presence of any gods, but before only other people. When the oath was rewritten in 1964 by Louis Lassagne, academic dean of the School of Medicine at Tufts University, the prayer was omitted, and that version has widely been accepted and is still used today by many US medical schools. And this is another version which I'm going to share with you. I swear to fulfill to the best of my ability and judgment this covenant. I will respect the hard-won scientific gains of those physicians in whose steps I walk, and gladly share such knowledge as is mine with those who are to follow. I will apply for the benefits of the sick all measures that are required, avoiding those twin traps of overtreatment and therapeutic nihilism. That's a lovely phrase. I will remember that there's art to medicine as well as science, and that warmth, sympathy, and understanding may outweigh the surgeon's knife or the chemist's drug. This is a bedside manner there. I will not be ashamed to say I know not, nor will I fail to call in my colleagues when the skills of another are needed for a patient's recovery. I will respect the privacy of my patients, for their problems are not disclosed to me that the world may know. Most especially must I tread with care in matters of life and death. If it is given me to save a life, all thanks, but it may also be within my power to take a life. This awesome responsibility must be faced with great humbleness and awareness of my own frailty. Above all, I must not play at God. I'll remember that I do not treat a fever child, a cancerous growth, but a sick human being whose illness may affect the person's family and economic stability. My responsibility includes these related problems. If I'm to care adequately for the sick, I will prevent disease wherever I can, for prevention is preferable to cure. Let me say this again. I will prevent disease whenever I can, for prevention is preferable to cure. Not too sure that they actually do that. I will remember that I remain a member of society with special obligations to all my fellow human beings, those sound of mind and body as well as the infirm. I do not violate this oath. May I enjoy life and art, respected while I live, and remembered with affection thereafter. May I always act so as to preserve the finest traditions of my calling, and may I long experience the joy of healing those who seek my help. In a 1989 survey of 126 U.S. medical schools, only 3 of them reported use of the original oath, while 33 used the Declaration of Geneva, 67 used the modified Hippocratic Oath, 4 used the Oath of Memmonite, 1 used the Covenant, 8 used another oath, and 1 used an unknown oath, and 2 didn't use any kind of oath. 7 medical schools did not reply to the survey. As of 1993, only 14% of medical oaths prohibited euthanasia, and only 8% prohibited abortion. In a 2000 survey of U.S. medical schools, all of the then extant medical schools administered some type of professional oath. Among schools of modern medicine, 62 of 122 used the Hippocratic Oath or a modified version of it. The other 60 schools used the original or modified Declaration of Geneva, Oath of Maimonides, or an oath authored by students or faculty, or both. All 19 osteopathic schools in the United States use the osteopathic oath, which is taken in place of or in addition to the Hippocratic Oath. The osteopathic oath was first used in 1938, and the current version has been in use since 1954. So, to be very clear, now this is not just in America, but we took America as an example. Very few doctors, if any, do not swear an oath to act in an ethical fashion. Let's call it that, right? In the most broadest stroke, in an ethical and morally acceptable fashion. Dave.
Nuremberg Code. Oh, and by the way, everything we're reading here is on the screen, and the links are visible. So, since we're only reading from Wikipedia, it's said to be the world's most accurate representation of all of these facts. The Nuremberg Code, German Nürnberger Codex, is a set of ethical research principles for human experimentation created by the court in US versus Brandt, one of the subsequent Nuremberg trials that were held after the Second World War. Though it was articulated as part of the court's verdict in the trial, the code would later become significant beyond its original context. In a review written on the 5th anniversary of the Brandt verdict, J. Katz writes that a careful reading of the judgment suggests that the authors wrote the code for the practice of human experimentation whenever it is being conducted. After World War II, a series of trials were held to hold members of the Nazi Party responsible for a multitude of war crimes. The trials were approved by President Harry Truman on the 2nd of May 1945 and were led by the United States, Great Britain and the Soviet Union. They began on the 20th of November 1945 in Nuremberg, Germany, in what became known as the Nuremberg Trials. In the trial of USA versus Brandt, which became known as the Doctors trial, German physicians responsible for conducting unethical medical procedures on humans during the war were tried. They focused on physicians who conducted inhumane and unethical human experiments in concentration camps, in addition to those who were involved in over 3.5 million sterilizations of German citizens. Several of the accused argued that their experiments differed little from those used before the war, and that there was no law that differentiated between legal and illegal experiments. This worried Andrew Ivy and Leo Alexander, who worked with the prosecution during the trial. In April 1947, Alexander submitted a memorandum to the United States Council for War Crimes outlining 6 points for legitimate medical research. An early version of the code, known as the memorandum, which stated explicit voluntary consent from patients is required for human experimentation, was drafted on the 9th of August 1947. On the 20th of August 1947, the judges delivered their verdict against Karl Brandt and 22 others. The verdict reiterated the memorandum's points and, in response to expert medical advisors for the prosecution, revised the 6 original points of the memorandum to 10 points. The 10 points became known as the Code, which includes such principles as informed consent, an absence of coercion, properly formulated scientific experimentation, and beneficence towards experiment participants. It is thought to have been mainly based on the Hippocratic Oath, which was interpreted as endorsing the experimental approach to medicine while protecting the patient. Meki.
These are the 10 points of the Nuremberg Code. 10 points of the code were given in the section of the judge's verdict entitled Permissible Medical Experiments. Point number 1. The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved as to enable him to make an understanding and enlightened decision. This latter element requires that before the acceptance of an affirmative decision by the experimental subject, there should be made known to him in the nature, duration, and purpose of the experiment, the method and means by which it is to be conducted, all inconveniences and hazards reasonably to be expected, and the effects upon his health or person which may possibly come from his participation in the experiment. The duty and responsibility for ascertaining the quality of the consent rests upon each individual who initiates, directs, or engages in the experiment. It is a personal duty and responsibility which may not be delegated to any other with impunity. 2. The experiment should be such as to yield fruitful results for the good of society, unprocurable by other methods or means of study, and not random and unnecessary in nature. 3. The experiment should be so designed and based on the results of animal experimentation and a knowledge of the natural history of the disease or other problem under study that the anticipated results will justify the performance of the experiment. 4. The experiment should be so conducted as to avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering and injury. 5. No experiment should be conducted where there is an a priori reason to believe that death or disabling injury will occur, except perhaps in those experiments where the experimental physicians also serve as subjects, so that's self-experiments. 6. The degree of risk to be taken should never exceed that determined by the humanitarian importance of the problem to be solved by the experiment. 7. Proper preparations should be made and adequate facilities provided to protect the experimental subject against even remote possibilities of injury, disability, or death. 8. The experiment should be conducted only by scientifically qualified persons. The highest degree of skill and care should be required through all stages of the experiment of those who conduct or engage in the experiment. 9. During the course of the experiment, the human subject should be at liberty to bring the experiment to an end if he has reached a physical or mental state where continuation of the experiment seems to him to be impossible. 10. During the course of the experiment, the scientist in charge must be prepared to terminate the experiment at any stage if he has probable cause to believe in the exercise of the good faith, superior skill, and careful judgment required of him that a continuation of the experiment is likely to result in injury, disability, or death to the experimental subject.
Yeah, now we get to the importance. The code has not been officially accepted as law by any nation or as official ethics guidelines by any association. In fact, the code's reference to Hippocratic duty to the individual patient and the need to provide information was not initially favoured by the American Medical Association. Katz observes that the Western world initially dismissed the Nuremberg Code as a code for barbarians, but unnecessary or superfluous for ordinary physicians. Additionally, the final judgment did not specify whether the code should be applied to such cases such as political prisoners, convicted felons, and healthy volunteers. The lack of clarity, the brutality of the unethical medical experiments, and the uncompromising language of the code created an image that it was designed for singularly egregious transgressions. However, the code is considered by some to be the most important document in the history of clinical research ethics because of its massive influence on global human rights. In the United States, the code and the related Declaration of Helsinki, that's better, influenced the drafting of regulations promulgated by the United States Department of Health and Human Services to ensure ethical treatment of human research subjects, known as the Common Rule, which is now codified in Part 46 of Title 45 of the Code of Federal Regulations. These regulations are enforced by institutional review boards, IRBs. In 1996, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights was adopted by the United Nations, and after enough nations had ratified the covenant, it came into force on the 23rd of March 1976. Article 7 prohibits experiments conducted without the free consent to medical or scientific experimentation of the subject. As of September 2019, the Covenant has 173 states parties. In his 2014 review, Gaw, G-A-W, observes that the code not only entered the legal landscape, but also became the prototype for all future codes of ethical practice across the globe. The idea of free and informed consent also serves as the basis for international ethical guidelines for biomedical research involving human subjects proposed by the World Health Organization. Another notable symposium review was published by the Medical University of Vienna in 2017. medical ethics in the 70 years after the Nuremberg Code 1947 to the present. President and Rector Marcus Müller writes in his introduction that the code constitutes one of the most important milestones in the history of medicine, providing for the first time a proper framework for research on human subjects. This milestone was not a voluntary, precautionary measure, but only came into existence in the aftermath of Nazi atrocities. The Nuremberg Code became a cornerstone of clinical research in bioethics. In 1995, Judge Sandra Beckwith ruled in the case in re Cincinnati radiation litigation, it says 874F.Sup 1995, that the Nuremberg Code may be applied in criminal and civil litigation in the federal courts of the United States.
Now, it bears repeating, however, that none of the ethical codices we have mentioned here, or any others for that matter, are enforceable by law. Okay, they may be applied, right? But it doesn't say that they must be applied. There's a slight but very important difference. They are guidelines and not laws. They have influenced laws, and some of the language has made it into law, but in its totality it has not. In many ways they are like UN resolutions, well-intentioned but ultimately powerless. Okay, worst case scenario. Worst case scenario. Let's jump right in the deep end here. Nazi Germany represents the penultimate manifestation of what can happen when all ethical and moral considerations are thrown out the window. A literal defenestration of our conscience. Following World War II, leading Nazi doctors were brought to justice before the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg. 20 doctors were charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity. The Nuremberg trial of the doctors revealed evidence of sadistic human experiments conducted at the Dachau, Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen concentration camps. I actually went to Dachau and I also went to Buchenwald. Not sure if I would recommend it to actually go have a look. Go. Since the Nuremberg trials, our society has had to confront the reality that the Nazi doctors were guilty of premeditated murder masqueraded as research. Professional modern medicine has had little difficulty condemning the Nazi doctors as evil men. But what is being said of the continued use of the Nazi doctors' medical research? Many scholars are now discovering in reputable medical literature multiple references to Nazi experiments or republished works of former SS doctors. These studies and references frequently bear no disclaimer as to how the data was obtained. Several scientists who have sought to use the Nazi research have stirred soul-searching about the social responsibility and potential abuses of science. These incidents prompt a number of questions for the scientific community. Is it ever appropriate to use data as morally repugnant as that which was extracted from victims of Nazism? If so, under what circumstances?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'll leave the link there so you can read the story for yourself. Nazi medicine and research on human beings. I can see that there's an image here from the Lancet, and there's war crimes trial in Nuremberg, Germany in October 1946. And that comes from the Associated Press and its copyright 2004. We've left that in there, like we cite everything. The atrocities of Nazi medicine, as well as the conditions that made them possible, are even today a topic of heated debates among historians and bioethicists. Proponents of various positions often refer to the Nazi period in discussion of the ethics of research on human subjects. The Nuremberg medical trial of 1946 to 1947 and the ensuing Nuremberg Code addressed in particular the absence of consent of those involved in research in Nazi experiments, and as a consequence formulated the principle of informed consent for the first time on an international level. The addition to this crucial issue, the preconditions and inherent rationale of Nazi biomedical science have been at the centre of debates. Recent historical research documents both similarities and differences between Nazi medicine and medicine in the other countries in the developed world. It also suggests implications relevant for today's debates on the ethics of research involving human beings. Two features of the Nazi period are crucial for understanding the specific forms of research on human beings undertaken then, the totalitarian political system, and the broader paradigm of racial hygiene, which was not solely the result of the Nazi political system, but rather a social movement that drew on concepts created by understandings of contemporary biology. Its origins precede the beginnings of the Nazi Party by more than 2 decades. But the autocratic political system and the program of racial hygiene reinforced each other and contributed to specific questions to be addressed by the medical sciences, and to a setting in which no ethical or legal regulations existed. This combination of factors created the conditions for research to be undertaken that would not otherwise have been possible. Meki.
Rassenhygiene, a German equivalent for eugenics, which really means racial hygiene, was perceived as an applied science founded on the laws of genetics, and as essential for improving the health of the Volk, the people or race. It was thought to provide long-term preventative measures against defects in the human genetic material, complementing individual hygiene. Central to racial hygiene was biological determinism, the view that humans live and behave as they do by virtue of their biological constitution and ultimately their genes. During the 1920s, many racial hygienists were sympathetic to the Nazi movement when it gathered strength, although similar eugenic aims were pursued by scientists, physicians, lawyers, and politicians across the political spectrum and in the international scientific community. After the Nazi takeover in 1933, medical scientists, particularly geneticists, expected improved conditions in various research endeavors. Many in the discipline, such as Fritz Lenz and Ernst Rüden, hoped to see the practical application of the results of their scientific work, thereby contributing to rebuilding society according to the laws of biology. They also hoped to gain access to further resources to extend their research programs. State and party institutions, in turn, were seeking scientific legitimization for their health and racial policies, such as the newly implemented sterilization law for the prevention of genetically diseased offspring. It's lovely, isn't it? Prevention of genetically diseased offspring. The law allowed the forced sterilization of those who supposedly had genetically determined disorders, along with the later law for the protection of German blood and German honor, which purported the racial inferiority of Jews. Considerable minorities of the population were defined as being biologically of minor value, with the implication that they lost most or all of the civil rights and were easily available as research material. It was the dehumanization, really, that got people here. In the realm of science policy, resources were diverted mainly towards research aimed at improving the health and performance of the Volk, people. As a result, questions about heredity and fitness for occupational or military service became central to most research programs. There is no indication that scientists were forced to do such research or to do it in the specific way outlined below. The cases that follow are selected examples only. Dave?
Resources for genetic research had increased considerably since the mid-1920s, with a further boost from 1933 onwards. As a result, more and more scientists framed their research projects in terms of genetics and claimed that their work could contribute to establishing criteria that differentiated inherited diseases from acquired diseases. These experiments carried out by Joseph Mengele in the Auschwitz concentration camp were among the most radical demonstrations of genetic research interests in these contexts. His investigations addressed questions such as the genetics of specific proteins protecting against infections, or the heredity of eye color. Mengele correlated experimental data gained from examination of living people, especially twins, with patho-anatomical and biochemical analysis done after they had been killed. Tissue samples were sent to Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Human Genetics and Eugenics in Berlin. Its director, Ottmar von Verschuer, received funding for some of these activities from the prestigious German... can you say that for me, please?
Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, which means German Research Society.
Verschuer was an internationally recognized scientist who, after World War II, was appointed Professor of Human Genetics at the University of Münster. These details confirm that parts of Mengele's research questions and methods conformed to this scientific logic of its time. However, in a context of unlimited access to unconsenting people who were defined as biologically inferior, the research program was accompanied by a complete disregard for the victims, and many cruelties ensued. With the German army and the Nazi SS organization, there were controversies over whether adding antibiotics and homeopathic drugs to traditional surgery would improve wounded soldiers' chances of survival. By contrast, within the Allied armies, this question had already been settled in favour of antibiotic therapy. SS physicians organised trials of antibiotic and homeopathic treatments in the concentration camps of Dachau and Ravensbrück. Healthy prisoners were given injections from the festering tissues of other inmates who had wound infections. In some people, small pieces of wood and glass were placed in open wounds in order to mimic war injuries more realistically. The victims were then treated with homeopathic preparations or various applications of sulfonamides. Some received no therapy at all. About a third of the victims died. All these experiments followed a scientific logic that was outdated at the time and which took no account whatever of the well-being of those involved in the research. The surviving victims had irreversible physical damage and severe psychological trauma. Experiments in the context of aviation medicine were aimed at finding methods to help pilots survive after their planes had been hit at very high altitudes or after an emergency landing at sea. The experiments carried out in the Dachau concentration camp focused on physiological questions such as the effects on the human body of low pressure at high altitude or of drinking salt water. Meki.
The researchers responsible, such as Siegfried Ruff, Sigmund Rascher, and Georg Wels, were all associated with university institutes of the German Air Force. For the high-altitude experiments, about 200 people were chosen from the camp prisoners, at least 70 of whom died during the experiments in a specially designed low-pressure cabin, or were killed afterwards to study the pathological changes in their brains. Judged strictly on scientific terms, the methods and results of some of these experiments were apparently innovative and useful. The US Air Force continued some of this research after the war and published the results in cooperation with a number of German physicians involved in the original experiments. Let me say that again. The US Air Force continued some of this research after the war and published the results in cooperation with a number of German physicians involved in the original experiments. Okay. By contrast to historical narratives postulating the irrationality of Nazi science, it must be noted that medical research programs in this political context pursued questions that were in some cases outdated, but which in other cases were in line with the prevailing standards of the international scientific community. The methods and techniques used also represented a broad range, from the conventional, even obsolete, to the innovative. In most cases, the practical implementation of these methods and techniques was brutal and showed total disregard for the suffering of the individuals concerned. The existing evidence illustrates an inherent logic of these research endeavors. The urge to establish new knowledge superseded any respect for the people who suffered in these experiments. Faced with the challenge of a given medical question, researchers sought opportunities to carry out the experiments required to solve it. It was in concentration camps, asylums, and hospitals in the occupied territories that they found these opportunities because existing legal regulations and sanctions did not apply there. In the context of the post-war Nuremberg medical trial, some of the protagonists of these medical atrocities formulated ethical arguments to justify their activities. The high value of gaining new scientific knowledge and the importance ascribed to the health and well-being of society as a whole, or the Volkskörper, the body of the people, like as a concept to everything, the people's body, were the central arguments placed above any regard for the suffering person. It's a highly utilitarian argument, like, is the suffering of one comparable to the suffering of a million? Well, something to discuss. Back to the text. The historical experience strongly suggests that the necessity of setting clear limits on research involving human beings. These limits should be defined with full respect for the participants' integrity and interests, and in accordance with the best available medical knowledge. The impetus to produce new knowledge and the interests of society or of potential future patients are legitimate considerations, but these must not take priority over the research subject's free will and well-being. Finally, such regulations should be linked to forceful sanctions in case of violation. The debates surrounding the formulation and the later revisions of the Declaration of Helsinki amply document the difficulties in implementing such regulations. Their practical applications remain a constant challenge. This is taken from The Lancet.
That's right. And the link is right there. You can see it on the screen. Pause it, type it in, do what you want. All right. Now, we've only got 7 minutes, Mickey, but I wanted to talk about something here.
Yes.
Right at this point, because I think it will sum it up. This thought experiment, it's known as the trolley experiment.
Yeah, that's right.
That is, that there's a train line, you're in charge of the switch that diverts traffic into two different places. One, there is a group of people on the tracks, and on the other, there's a single person on the tracks. Now, Mackie, let's perform this. Now, if I was giving you this experiment, this thought experiment, what would be your action be? Would you divert the trolley to the group of people or the single person, and why?
What information do I have? Is that the only information I have? There's
that is at the first question. The first time it's posed, you need to not have any other information.
Yeah, perfect. Now, obviously, and most people would probably react in the same way, they would choose to do the least harm.
That's right.
Meaning they would divert the train, as would I, with that information only, to kill only the one person rather than the group of people.
That's good. So this is what I woke up to at my house this morning, was the thought experiment. Let's call it, I called it the train, but I'm wrong, and I was reminded how wrong I was by my daughter, which is fine. Which is good, and I really admired her for her strength and fortitude. And then I said, well, and I gave the same answer. I would, morally, I would, sacrifice the one for the many. The many are the group. Now, I said, unfortunately, the trolley experiment has a secondary question where you add a trait to one side. You give them a value, the singular person a value, and the group has a trait. So they fall into a group, and you can describe the group however you want. So you could, for instance, I'm going to pose the question again to you, Mickey, where you have a 10-year-old, rather, as the singular person, and the group of people are all very elderly people who have lived full lives. How does that change your action?
You see, now with the additional information, the argument would be, again, from a not entirely utilitarian, but more I guess from a quantitative point of view. The 10-year-old still has their entire life in front of them. And
that's right.
Potentially, yeah. And whereas the group of, you say, quite elderly people,
yes,
may very well have lived their life and arguably much closer to death than the 10-year-old. So in that case, it would make sense, again, going with the majority as well of people, to divert the tracks and have the train or tram, as it were, hit the group of elderly people.
Yes, absolutely.
The trolley.
So Mickey, you've answered those exactly the way that everyone should answer the question. I think the moral approach that we have to that thought experiment is you're doing it for, firstly, it's the many, sacrificing one for the many, and that's you can apply how this might you can think about this and how it applies to what we've already spoken about. I suppose I'm not giving any credence to any of thing that we've said. However, you've got to see how that an argument can be posed, same argument, but you give some value and no value to others, and that changes the outcome of the trolley experiment. I think that's really important to have at least a position on this. Now, you might answer it differently. There was one kid, there was a viral video that went around where this young kid was being asked the trolley experiment, and he said, well, what I would do is actually put the one person with the group of the others. And they go, well, you can't do that. He goes, well, how's the train going to run over all of them at once? It wasn't to save anyone. He saw the objective was to take them out. And so he just grouped them all together on the same side and switched the train to do that. That's it. He's not evil, but he saw a different agenda. And that, to me, makes me smile that there are people there that can see outside the box. That's what it is.
No, that's a fair point.
See, for me, when I did it, I said, am I in control of the switch? And if I do nothing, where does it go? That was my question. So if I do nothing, what happens? Does the train derail and everybody's saved? What? And they go, no, you don't understand. It's only this or this. And they go, well, if I don't touch it, it's going to hit someone. I'm just going to walk away. I'll be down the shops. I don't really care for your experiment. It's silly. If you could derail the train, that's even better, right? Everyone's saved. But I don't understand why you're so intent on killing people with your stupid ideas, right? So I had to say that out loud, Becky.
And then look, and I'm with you. I mean, the experiment is designed to make you uncomfortable, to put you in an impossible situation, really, right? Because to force decisions out of people will reveal a lot about you, if you want to or not.
Yeah. Even
if you think you're gaming the experiment. Oh, there's the music.
I can't believe it. It's been that quick. Anyway, look, coming up next is probably Jer Bear and his awesome show, After Hours. And we'll catch you 7 a.m. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, Eastern US time for Plato's Cave. And then in next week, trying to say it's coming around again. But what do we do, Mickey? What do we tell the people?
Be safe.